Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you're interested in, then why not subscribe? Today with a deck that I didn't think I would ever be doing on this channel, Crystal Beast. The new support is actually fairly decent, and I did come out with a variant that, well, it's lacking in certain departments, but it's fairly playable, and it's actually not a bad deck at all. So this is what I came up with, and if you're a new player, or if you're like very much into the whole Rainbow Dragon thing, or you're already counting the Crystal Beast names to see if you can make it up to 7 to actually summon Rainbow Dragon, I'm sorry, not this one, but if you check in the description, I will have put a timestamp down there to a deck profile later on in this video that actually can summon Rainbow Dragon. Obviously, you lose a bit of consistency along the way because you have to be running Crystal Beasts that don't really do crazy amounts of stuff. I know you can play a version with advanced Crystal Beasts and the advanced Dark Field spell, but that one is very expensive. Yes, it can basically spam out Rainbow Dragon as if it's nothing, but this makes it a lot more expensive, and lots of people on YouTube have already done that one, so check this out if you want to. But now I'll just be going into the card by card and what I like about this deck, and you can already see on the right hand side there's lots of ways to improve this deck by not spending too crazy amount of super rares or ultra rares, but there's ways to easily improve this deck and make it a lot more competitive. Not that it isn't competitive right now, you can still have a nice time in like gold and like even lower plat, but still you would need certain additions. You know how the meta attacks is going with certain hand traps and certain other cards, so there is that. We will be starting out with the ratios of the Crystal Beasts. 1 Ruby Carbuncle, because most Crystal Beasts they're very searchable in the deck, like all of them, and you can place them in your zone from your deck and so on. So this card can actually come up quite a few times because there's quite a few different ways of actually summoning this. Is it from the graveyard, from the deck, from your spell trap zone, and then you can free your Crystal Beasts from the continuous spell trap zone and maybe push for game, which is something that is very valuable in this, so definitely one of that. More would just be a bit bricky because this card doesn't do much more than being able to do this, and since Pegasus can also get this card from the graveyard into your spell trap zone, usually you don't need more than one. We run 2 Crystal Beast Amber Mammoths, and this card, yes, you will not see this in any other deck profile, but there's one specific reason why we run this card in here, because I decided to put in one card. Since this is meant to be like a purish version, a budget version, I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, just put in tons of trap cards and then just be done with it. I kind of wanted to incorporate the playstyle, and since we lack certain cards, we do need to have a higher Crystal Beast monster count in this deck actually, because we don't have as many good ways of searching them. For example, in a very good variant, you'd be playing like 2 or 3 Foolish Burial Goods and like 1 or 2, probably mostly 1 of this card here. This card, the on-field effect is completely worthless for us, but if this card is in the graveyard, you can banish it and add 1 Crystal Beast monster and 1 field spell from your deck to your hand. So this is why a lot of decks would already have this then at 2 or 3 and have another way of sending it to the graveyard with this spell. So you would already get Crystal Beast monsters to your hand then if you use this effect, because that's what it does add as well. And since we don't have that for this card here, we need a Crystal Beast monster count that isn't totally low, because if you draw this card but no Crystal Beasts, well, you can't really use the effect. So this is a bit annoying in the end, so that's why you have to substitute it by running a few more Crystal Beasts and some other cards that I'll be talking about in a second. If you run this card, if you want to include this at 1, you could, even if you want to keep it as cheap as possible, you could just cut one of them, plonk this card in here, and you can send it to the graveyard not only by Foolish Burial Goods, but also by this one. You technically in the extra deck then want to be running stuff like Dugaris or any other extra deck monster that has a discard, because if you draw this card, it is absolutely useless, and Crystal Beasts themselves don't have any discard that I know of. Once it's in your hand, the only thing you can be doing is like Forbidden Droplet it to the graveyard or whatnot, so that's a bit lame, because that's a one-off unsearchable card in this specific variant at least. So this is a card that I can easily put in, and then you wonder, oh, what field spell am I going to be searching? Obviously, you're going to be thinking about Ancient Ruins, Ancient City. This card can be very nice. It has, if you have 3 Crystal Beast monsters in continuous spell trap zone, it's a spell trap negate. It's okay. Like, you will usually not want to have 3 in here because you see you have quite a hard trap lineup and stuff, which you would be cutting if you'd be running more of this card, but getting to 3 isn't actually super easy. It's fairly doable, but it's not super easy, and the other 2 effects are, yeah, they're not really great. Like, it's not really something you'd be doing. This is usually where Advanced Dark comes into play, and in today's meta, especially with Elements coming out in a few days, Necro Valley is a card that you can be running. If you want to keep it on the budget side of things, Summon Breaker is also a card that at least annoys your opponent, and in a control deck, if you get this card for free into your hand, you only have to run one of it, and you want to be using this card anyway for consistency measures, then having Summon Breaker in your deck isn't terrible. It doesn't hurt your deck too much because 3 summons, this isn't an extra deck spammy variant. It won't hurt the deck at all. And if you want to be a bit cheeky, if you want to be annoying your opponent a tiny bit, but not in a super mega floodgatey way, then this card is something to search. And if you want to be super consistent with the anime and whatnot, you can actually play Duel Academy in this deck, because this card gains effects based on the monster types on the field. And you can see we run quite a lot of beast monsters. And then if you activate a trap card, you can target one card your opponent controls, destroy it. You activate lots of trap cards. You have plenty of ways to actually search trap cards. So Duel Academy, also not a bad card to search off of the effect of this card. So there's plenty of stuff that you can already be doing. If you want to put one of them in, the only problem is then you technically also have to run stuff like Dugaris, because otherwise hard to get it to the graveyard. It is what it is. And then yes, with Foolish Burial Goods you can make this more consistent, but we have been stopped at this point because this is why we run maybe a few more Crystal Beasts than the average player would. It's not that many more, but there will be other cards that also try to compensate for the fact that we don't have that consistency boost. 2 of this one, you can technically play whatever one you want, but this has some synergy with this card here, Crystal Brilliance. I'm a bit annoyed that I have to jump in the deck profile a lot, because usually I like to do like actual card by card, but here I have to jump because all of the cards are somewhat connected. There's 3 different archetypes basically within Crystal Beasts, so this is one of the reasons why I chose Amber Mammoth. This isn't a card that you have to be playing. This is a card that I chose to be playing to have a bit of an out to certain things, and also to incorporate the Crystal Beast playstyle in this deck profile. I always like to have decks, well, do stuff that other decks might not be doing. I don't want to claim that this card is like specifically brilliant in this specific deck, but it's actually playable and it's searchable, so at 1 it's not going to be too bad. Obviously, if you want to be cutting it for other good cards, stuff like Nemesis Corridor, for example, you could cut this for. This card comes in very handy because this one banishes itself. We'll be talking about that in a second. Then you get Corridor on hand, on board, and with Corridor you can actually go into Thunder Dragon Colossus, which is something that's quite fun. Plus you recycle a Crystal Beast from your banished zone, and this one, which you only run one of, back into your deck, so this can also be helpful. And you have 1 Colossus on board, which is amazing. It's colossal what this card can do to your opponent, so this is a tiny addition that you can be making, and the deck becomes a lot better. This card actually boosts your opponent, your Crystal Beast monster's attack by its original defense. So this one becomes a 3300 beat stick by literally just flipping this card. So this is, in my opinion, somewhat strong for finishing games because you don't rely on your extra deck that much. Usually Crystal Beast decks kind of have a way of finishing the game out quite quickly by extra deck means as well. This one would be relying somewhat on Crystal Brilliance. You can wear your opponent down in other ways, it's very, very possible, but this one is one of those. And the other effect, if a Crystal Beast card is placed in your spell trap zone, even during the damage trap, funny enough, you can send this face-up card to the graveyard and special summon 1 Crystal Beast monster from your hand or graveyard, and I take half damage this turn, so it protects you. It can get your place set up for next turn if you have Crystal Beast Sapphire Pegasus in your graveyard, which you will be having. So this card isn't terrible, but it would be one of the cards to cut if you want to make this the most competitive version. So this would be like a card you could cut for like the Foolish Burial Goods, or for like the Nemesis Corridor, or there's lots of things. So you don't need to run this card, but in this specific variant, I felt like this card wasn't too bad. Cobalt Eagle, mainly usually in these kind of decks because it's a wind monster and you can use it to go into Lightning Chidori, which we do not be running, but also it can be a nice card to actually get rid of certain stuff in your spell trap zone. If you, for example, make like a mistake in game play, or you just end up with too many cards in your face-up spell trap zone, too many Crystal Beasts, then this is a card where you can actually get a card back to the deck, because sometimes that's somewhat important for things like Crystal Bond. If you want to activate it again, then you can actually place a card on top of the deck, and that can be helpful. So this is why I decided to run this over like Tiger, for example. We have triple Pegasus because Pegasus is one of the playmakers of this deck, especially with the new release of this one. This one is very, very strong for this deck. It has multiple applications. You usually want to be putting this in the spell trap zone. The good thing is Pegasus also does stuff from your hand. Like if you draw into this, you're not screwed. You don't need to be running 2, although 2, I think, in my opinion, is probably a better ratio, but since we're trying to keep it as cheap as possible, not necessary. So if you draw this, it's not a massive brick if you go into Sapphire Pegasus anyway, because then you can still put it in your spell trap zone. You just lose 1 out on 1 card in your hand. If you have this in your spell trap card zone, this is where the effect really shines, because then you can actually banish this card and special summon 1 level 4 lower Crystal Beast monster from your deck, negates its effects. That's how you technically could be summoning advanced Crystal Beasts, because then they don't send themselves to the graveyard actually. So this is a way how you could incorporate them, but you don't really want to. It's kind of pointless to do so, but if you want to, this would be a way. And you can add 1 ultimate crystal monster from your deck to your hand. And if you're an old school player and you're like, what's an ultimate crystal monster? Well, I think it had to do with the Japanese translation of the name. This card is meant to be an ultimate crystal card, and I think it's something about the Japanese name. I'm not sure if they just changed it or if it was meant to be that from the start and they just called it Rainbow Dragon because it had a nicer ring to it. You know how sometimes translations can screw stuff up. So this is a way of getting this card to your hand as well, which sounds like, why would I want this in my hand if I can't actually summon it in this deck? Well, there is this card here, Awakening of the Crystal Ultimates actually. Then you can reveal 1 ultimate crystal monster, which would be this one, and then do 1 of these 2 effects, and you can take 1 Rainbow Bridge or Rainbow Refraction from your deck to your hand, or send it to the graveyard. This is how you would get this card to the graveyard. Mainly you will be searching this card with it, but you can also be searching Rainbow Bridge, which then can search any crystal spell trap. You can see it in multiple different archetypes within the archetype. It's a whole big mess, but yeah, this is why you run 1 of this. It comes in handy a lot of the time. Since this is a quick spell, this can be also quite nice, and you can special summon 1 crystal beast monster from your hand, deck, graveyard, or spell trap zone. So this is very, very versatile, and it's definitely worth running 1 Rainbow Dragon for it. We have Crystal Master next. This is a card that no other deck profile would be running, and the reason for it is, well, there's 2 reasons for it. First of all, actually, the second effect of the Pendulum card, the Pendulum effect, your opponent cannot target ultimate Crystal Beast monsters or Crystal Beast monsters with card effects, can be coming in handy, not overly helpful because it's not your spell traps. That would be a bit more helpful, but you don't really want to put it in your Pendulum zone, because the issue with it is you can't really get it out of there. Your opponent doesn't really want to get it out of there, and it takes up a lot of space in your spell trap zone that is usually quite busy. So this card would have been nice in the olden days where pendulum zones were different zones, but now that's not why we play this card. We play this card because we can normal summon it, tribute it, and then search 1 ultimate crystal monster, crystal beast monster, or crystal spell trap from your deck to your hand. Obviously you sacrifice your normal summon with it, so this is only really good if you have this card in your hand, this card in your hand, or this card in your hand, because other than that it doesn't do all that much. But I can still search a Crystal Bond, and Crystal Bond can add you 1 to your hand and then place Crystal Beast Rainbow Dragon in your spell trap zone, so you still get the search of this card, and you can still get 1 Crystal Beast monster on your board at least. It's not amazing, but yeah, this is one of the consistency cards that I'm talking about. It's not great for the specific deck profile, but we need it because we are not running the expensive combo of Foolish Burial Goods into this one, or triple Crystal Bond, or technically you can also play like triple Pot of Extravagance if you want to, because this card like draws you 2, and that's also helpful, and so on and so on. This is why this card is in here. It does some stuff in combination with certain other cards you have in hand, and if everything fails, it can always search you like 1 of the trap cards. If you have something in your hand still, then it's okay, but usually you want to be searching with this Crystal Bond or Rainbow Dragon or the Awakening of the Crystal, because that's also a crystal spell, so that's quite fun. But other than that, technically in the later stages of the game you can still search like Crystal Raigeki, you can search Crystal Miracle, you can search Crystal Conclave with it. It's not a terrible card, but obviously it sadly isn't counted as Crystal Beast monster. That would have been helpful, and also yeah, it takes up your normal summon, which only isn't an issue if you play this, because this gives you an extra normal summon. So there's that. 1 Crystal Promise, also a card you wouldn't be seeing in other deck profiles, but I decided to put this in here over this one, for example. Crystal Beacon can be nice, but we don't really have the resources. We don't really play the deck that wants to spam out extra deck monsters and that wants to first turn go into crazy plays. So I felt like As a recovery play, this can be a lot nicer because it can do stuff with Ruby Carbuncle. Since it's searchable, it can do stuff with like Sapphire Beast and so on and so on. You can cut this for any other card if you want to. I felt like this has actually saved my bacon multiple times, so I think it's somewhat nice, but it's also one of these cards, don't have to run it. You could even play Crystal Blessing for the late game stages. Sometimes you do run out of Crystal Beasts, and then this card can be coming in handy, especially if you then don't have any stuff that you can be using with this one anymore. And this one can actually bounce stuff. We'll be talking about that in a second. Let's go to the second archetype, the Rainbow Bridge stuff. This one, not once per turn, so very, very nice. And it can search you your crystal spell traps from your hand, which is mainly your trap lineup or the way for you to get into your Crystal Beast plays, which, look at the artwork of this card. It is beautiful. It's Jesse Anderson, or whatever it's called in the actual, I think that's the English name, isn't it? With the Ruby Carbuncle. It is such a nice artwork. And this card, while we're at it, you can add one Crystal Beast monster from your deck to your hand and place one Crystal Beast monster with a different name from your deck face up in your spell trap zone. The problem is from your deck, so if you draw into this card, you can't place it anymore because usually you kind of want to, but if you actually add to your hand Pegasus and you have this card in hand, then just place a different one and then use Pegasus to place it from your hand there, then you can still special out some more stuff and so on and so on. So this card is somewhat amazing. You could cut it down to 1 if you want to. If you want to be playing some other ultra rare stuff, if you don't want to commit fully, then try it out at 1, see how the deck works, and then maybe expand. 3 I feel like is a bit much, especially if you have the other consistency boost with these cards, then you do not need more. Technically, if you play this and this combo, you can get away with only playing 1 as well, so keep that one in mind. 1 Paw of Prosperity, you usually want to be going first since it's a control deck, so the whole having your damage isn't too tragic, and also your extra deck doesn't matter at all, and you don't really draw cards in this deck, so this one is quite nice actually to get the missing piece that your hand could be using in that scenario. Next up, one of the new big cards. This card, very, very nice. It does like so much. It has such a wall of text. During your main phase, you can normal summon one Crystal Beast monster in addition to your normal summon set. Very, very important, especially with stuff like Crystal Master. Sadly, this isn't a crystal card, so you can't search for the Master. There's that, you know, it is what it is. And then you can use one of the following effects, which is during your main phase, you can destroy one Crystal Beast card you control or in your hand, can be actually quite important. And if you do add one Crystal Spell Trap from your deck to your hand, this is how you get into your control-based deck style, play style, which is quite nice. And if a Crystal Beast card is placed in your spell trap zone, even during the damage step, you can target one card your opponent controls, return both that target and this card to the hand, so you can actually bounce some cards. You don't really get rid of them if your opponent is playing a back row deck. You can turn floodgates off with this, but you don't really deal with them, so it's a bit annoying. And you might have wondered, why do all of these cards say even during the damage step? That is, if your Crystal Beast gets run over by battle and then goes into the zone, into the spell trap zone, I think that would be during the damage step still, so they need to make sure that it triggers on the cases that back in the days were one of the cases where it triggers the most. And even nowadays, like, being run over by battle will still happen a few times, so it makes sense to include this one. Otherwise it would be a bit bad, because that's kind of the whole gimmick of the deck. One Forbidden Droplet, because you basically get this card for free in the master bundles, and it's very nice. If you don't want to be playing stuff like Ash Blossom, Forbidden Droplet, or Infinite Impermanence, or you're really new to the game and you haven't opened these bundles yet, which I would still recommend, then you can play triple Forbidden Chalice, and it's actually not too bad for the deck either. This card, already talked about it, very, very nice searcher, but sometimes if you just have this card in hand and not one of those, or not this one, or no way of going into this card, then it can be dead. But you can already see there's so many ways of going into Pegasus and then getting this to your spell trap zone and so on and so on, so it's not tragic. One of the cards that usually would be like crazy powerful hand traps like Maxi, these days, even if you want to keep a cheap Skullmeister, is somewhat nice. There's stuff like Dimension Shifter, because the graveyard isn't super important for this deck, so it's not crazy important that you have graveyards access, especially if you don't run this combo. Then this card is even less bad for you, because the graveyard doesn't really matter to you all that much, since you don't even want to summon Rainbow Dragon, so you could be running stuff like Dimension Shifter instead. But this one just slows the game down, doesn't harm you too much, because your board will be consisting of Sapphire, Pegasus anyway, and a lot of the time you even get effects if this card, if one of your Crystal Beasts is put into your continuous spell trap zone, then this triggers these effects as well and cleans your opponent's board up, which can be quite nice in a control deck. We have Crystal Raigeki at 1 in here, also a card that I put in not just for nostalgia reasons, because this card can actually help you deal with floodgates of your opponent in a way that you actually get rid of them and not just bounce them through the hand, because since we lack lots of extra deck options, this one is a card that's searchable and can actually be quite important, and also it can clear up your spell trap zone. Sometimes you have a bit too many of those in there, then this card can be quite nice, but it's not worth it running it at more than one because it's quite situational and it doesn't do all that much, because sometimes you want to be popping some other stuff or adding stuff back to your hand with Conclave and so on, so this isn't overly amazing. And it can't pop one of your monsters on board, because that would be amazing if it could like pop a Crystal Beast monster, then puts it in the spell trap zone and so on, but no, it sends to the graveyard one Crystal Beast card from your spell trap zone. It's a bit annoying. It almost says Crystal Beast card as if there's any other Crystal Beast cards that aren't monsters, because they all just call Crystal, not Crystal Beast. Just something to keep in mind, a little tidbit about the deck. Lost Wind, very good for grind games, very good for decks that are on the cheaper side. This is also basically hand trap slots with Max C. You can even run stuff like Nibiru if you like. It doesn't hurt you too much either. There's so many things to triple Ash Blossom, whatnot, everything you can be doing. And these days, Infinite Impermanence, same as Ash Blossom, is just a good hand trap. If you're ever forced to go second, then these cards can be very important. 2 Crystal Miracles, 3 is a bit much. You technically want to be searching this and hope you run into like Crystal Raigeki and Conclave or something doing your opening turn, so you don't have to search them, and then this is your first turn boards, like one of those 2 and possibly like another hand trap, possibly something else in hand. And that's how you keep building up your control. This has a second effect where you can place one Crystal Beast monster in your face-up zone. Sadly, it's also only from your hand, deck, or graveyard. Would have been nice if it was from your banished zone to get this card back, but it doesn't. It's a bit annoying, but it doesn't really matter. It's mainly in here to stop crazy spell traps from your opponent like Lightning Storm, because your back row needs to be protected. And other than that, it's still a nice counter trap. Crystal Conclave, very, very nice card, but it has a bit of a weird one because you cannot activate these effects in the same chain. So it's not quite that easy that you can just flip this and then like usually continuous trap and then use the effect instantly, but you kind of have to have this on board before. It's a bit of a weird one. It's the timing of it is quite strange from time to time, but the effect of it is very, 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 very good. Once per turn, if a face-up Crystal Beast monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon one Crystal Beast monster from your deck, which is very nice because it comes up actually with certain effects. Like with the effect of this one, for example, you can trigger it and then summon one Crystal Beast from your deck, or if stuff gets run over by battle, or during your turn if you still have Conclave on board, then you can use it in combination with the Rainbow Bridge as well, so it floats quite a bit, doesn't only do it once per turn. It's not a hard once per turn. Like I think if you had 2 Crystal Conclaves, you could actually do it twice, which is quite nice. And yeah, keep that in mind. Works for both effects actually, the whole bouncing stuff and sending to the graveyard also. So if you have 2 of them and if you have 2 Crystal Beast monsters, then this isn't too bad as multiple as well, because these cards are somewhat old, so they didn't put the hard once per turn clause on this one. But the most important effect of this one is you can send this face-up card from the field to the graveyard, target one Crystal Beast card you control and one card on the field, and return them both to the hand. Quite nice, but yeah, you can't use these effects in the same chain. And we talked about Crystal Brilliance as well. Can enable you OTKs, can enable you to, in the grind game, create monsters that are very hard to, well, basically turns your monsters into Blue Eyes White Dragon, which isn't terrible considering Blue Eyes White Dragon is a fan favorite, and also 3000 attack or even more is quite the thing to get over. Plus you can summon one monster from your graveyard back, which can be quite helpful. For the extra deck, just some rank 4 stuff, nothing really too crazy. Rhapsody can actually come in handy these days with all the graveyard resources being around. Usually they can chain it though, so it doesn't really matter too much. For the OTK, Kagaga, Samurai, Malevolent Sins, Suship, even if you want to pop certain cards, sometimes that can be helpful because you clean up quite well with this deck. If you then have 2 level 4s and there's some card that you want to get permanently rid of, then this one is the one for you. Exosister Asophiel, very nice to bounce certain stuff. Obviously stuff that you want to be running, Lightning Shidori, Baguska, good turn for one play. If you don't have stuff like your Crystal Miracle or Conclave, for example, then going with your 2 level 4s into this one can be quite nice. We have Dugares, very, very nice for this card, very nice to get Sapphire, Pegasus back from your graveyard, trigger their effect, and so on and so on and so on. We have Zeus, because obviously we can attack directly with Heartland Draco, which is quite fun. So there's lots of different things you can be doing with the extra deck. For the links, this is actually something that might be coming up because you can use 2 beast monsters. These are just generic good stuff that sometimes do things like Geonator Transverser, one of my favorite cards. This one can stall, it's not amazing. They're just in here basically, so you have a full extra deck for Pot of Prosperity. Decode Talker you get for free in the starter deck, very nice card for protection and damage. Same for Power Code Talker, and Raster Liger you also get for free. Access Code Talker obviously is better, can run the Nightmares, there's loads of things that you can be running instead, which yeah, you know how the drill goes. Cards to consider in this deck are Pot of Extravagance, if you want to keep it cheap but you feel like the deck isn't consistent enough. Maybe cut stuff like Crystal Promise, for example, maybe cut stuff like this and maybe one of them, and then play like triple Performance Power Popper up, because it does help you cycle through your deck and possibly draw into cards that you do need, and then on the way you can discard stuff like one of your Crystal Beasts that you do not need, like Amber Mammoth, Cobalt Eagle, whatnot. So you don't really want to be getting rid of Rainbow Dragon in your hand, so this is a bit annoying. But other than that, this can draw you into the cards that you need, because it is an engine that needs like two things: Crystal Beast Monster, mainly Pegasus, and the spell traps to actually do stuff. So this can be coming in somewhat handy. And if you want to be playing super controlsy, there can be only one. Doesn't really hurt the deck too much. The problem is these are beast monsters, so this is why this one is also a better choice from time to time, because I think the Tiger is also a beast one. So you have a bit of an issue with this, because this one is beast and this one is beast. You have to watch out. But other than that, this one doesn't harm you too much, at least. It's not amazing. Amazing transition into this one. This is the deck profile where you can actually summon Rainbow Dragon, because we will be doing the counting together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, technically 8, because we also have this, and this is a Crystal Beast, but this card will be banished. You will be using this beforehand because it's an essential, an integral part of the combo of Crystal Beasts, because you actually want to be getting Rainbow Dragon to your hand, and this is one of the best ways to do it. Then this card is banished though, and it doesn't work for the Rainbow Dragon's effect anymore, so you technically still have to run the other ones, unless you want to be running stuff like Nemesis Corridor, for example, so this can technically shuffle it back, but then you kind of need to be actually drawing into this card. You technically could run 2 of this one and then cut one of the Crystal Beasts that don't matter that much if you have multiple of these, because the battle effect is also somewhat nice. You can special summon it from your hand, so that's not too bad. But now you actually have the Crystal Beast. You cut out some stuff, you can still cut things like this one, but I felt like if you actually run the Crystal Beast, this one can actually be somewhat interesting, and then you can summon Rainbow Dragon by like turn 3 or so usually. Not that the effect is too crazy anyway, but technically you could go into the whole fusion thing then, but they're not overly dramatic, they're not overly crazy, the new fusions, so I feel like it's not worth it. Craft the 2 ultra rares to actually get this going, but if you already have them, might as well put them in the extra deck, because that doesn't matter too much. So this would be a way to actually get into Rainbow Dragon if this is what you so desire. Rating wise, the strength of the deck, the power level, I would rate at like a solid 3. If you actually put more cards in it, it would be bordering like a 5 if you use all the stuff that you can be putting in here, what I was talking about earlier in the video. Then this can be going up to like a low 5 or a very high 4, but as it is, it's a solid 3. It's not amazing, it's not super crazy. Sometimes it wins you games, you're fairly reliant on going first. You do have some go second place, it's not terrible going second, and with some hand traps you can actually circumvent this a little bit. It does what it does, and it does what it does well, but it does have certain issues because you do not have a good way to finish games, like a very good way. There could be certain things in the extra deck to circumvent that, and you will be running out of resources quicker than certain other control decks, so there's that as well. And sometimes you will be having brick hands, so a 3 is not terrible. When it comes to consistency, I'd give this deck like a strong 3 or a weak 4. I would go with a strong 3 right now, because we still have the option to go into a lot more consistency, and we still be running some of the Crystal Beasts that actually do break your hand from time to time. Like there is a combo where you just have like 2 Crystal Beasts in hand and nothing else that searches stuff, and you basically like set 2 and kind of pass your turn. So this happens. It doesn't happen too many times because you do have quite a lot of consistency cards, but as it is now, I would say it's also like a good 3, but it is still a 3. When it comes to budget value, I want to say it's a 3, but I've given it a very strong 2. The thing is, the deck isn't necessarily cheap. Like, it's not cheaper than any other budget deck, and it's not that it's not strong, but you can't really splash this into lots of other decks. Like, you don't really get anything out of it value-wise other than Crystal Beast stuff. Like, there's no good stuff, generic cards in here besides Pot of Prosperity, and Also, you can't really mix this with any deck, so like the fun factor, the like usability factor is also not too high. And for the fact of how expensive it is, there's other decks that cost less than this and are equally as competent or even a bit more competent than this one. So budget value wise, I would say 2. Doesn't mean you don't have to buy this deck, not saying like this isn't a buy. If you really like Crystal Beasts, then Crystal Beasts aren't terrible at all. If you have the most competitive version, you can actually climb to Diamond. With this one, you can get into Platinum. It's not insanely impossible, but it will take some time and some understanding of the deck, I would say. But it definitely is worth buying it, but it's not like the craziest deck you could be playing. And we are at the replay section, starting with a go second replay actually, which doesn't matter too much because our opponent is actually playing a control deck themselves. I would say Harpies aren't like, well, they can go second, but also they have quite some control options. They have this one, they have the trap that makes it so you can't activate monster effects anymore, and they have lots of spell traps that can actually annoy you during your turn, plus the Sunko monster which can bounce. So it's somewhat of a control deck and they have good resource management. So in the end, it's annoying because they get to establish their board first, and as a control deck, obviously that's what you want to be doing, but it could have been a lot worse for us going second, since, you know, a lot of boards of your opponent involve like crazy stuff that you can't really get through unless you start with lots of hand traps. This is why we want to go first, but I feel like this replay is going to show what this deck does specifically well and how you sometimes can go second as well if your opponent especially doesn't really know what your main playstyle is. So what we want to be doing here is activate Rainbow Bridge first, because then they don't have a monster that they can actually bounce of us, plus normal summoning Ruby Carbuncle does basically nothing here. Let's hope they don't have Ash Blossom for this, because otherwise we would be not like super screwed, but technically it could be a bit of an issue. Could still normal summon Carbuncle, have Conclave, have 2 Torrential Tribute, so we shouldn't be finished the next turn, but they can actually get our Carbuncle back to our hand if they have any spell trap that they can activate, and then if this card is bounced to our hand, Conclave does nothing, so we kind of have to hope they summon more stuff, and then we Torrential Tribute them. But they did not have an Ash Blossom, slight spoiler, we actually get to search, and the card that I wanted to search here was not like another trap, because we kind of need a monster setup, so Crystal Bond made the most sense. Technically, you have the fear again, or do they have Ash Blossom, but it doesn't really matter here. What I decided to go for is, by the way, I activate Crystal Bond, add Pegasus to my hand, and then already place the Crystal Beast Rainbow Dragon in my spell trap zone. Technically, you can place any kind of card here, then normal summon Pegasus, then place this card as well if you want to. Now, there's different ways of how you can do this, but here, in case they did have the trap that negates monster effects, or the activation of the effects or whatever, then we would be a bit screwed, because we do need this card to pop off, because we have this, and then this would get us into more combos. Plus, we don't want to already use our normal summon now, and if we get shut down, even in Impermanence would have been annoying, because then we couldn't have done much more. Now I activate the effect of this card, but they think, oh yeah, monster effect, let's use this, so they can't do that. Fun fact though, this counts as the activation of a spell card, because it is a continuous spell card, so the effect actually goes through regardless, so it doesn't really matter that much. So we actually get to special summon one of our monsters, and we actually get to search, and the search was very important for this one. Now we can't activate the effect of Crystal Beast Sapphire Pegasus, which is absolutely fine. Just for the people that don't know this card, if you control a wind monster until the end of this turn, negate any monster effects your opponent activates. Crazy, absolute crazy. And if you control a Harpy, you can activate it from your hand. Harpies can be very interesting. There is ways to search this card, but they're not very strong, so this is why Harpies, besides I think one tournament top somewhere in France, I think haven't done all that much, especially not recently. So what we can do now is activate this and get into our different bridge cards. We get into the Rainbow Bridge of the Heart, which is very important for our plays, because we can bounce one card, or we can destroy one of our own monsters, then search stuff, so we can actually get rid of things. They could have activated Harpy Lady in any of these instances because the spell trap was activated, but they didn't really feel like popping this one because they knew we still had our normal summon, and they saw us adding a monster to our hand, so would have been kind of useless here. So we pop this, get into Crystal Miracle, because Crystal Miracle is very important. Good that Harpy Lady can only deal with monster effects as well, so we don't really have much of an issue with actually setting our whole spell and trap lineup. The only issue that we technically could be having is that they bounce one of our monsters that we normal summon, and then we're kind of screwed. Thing is though, it didn't really matter that much because we have 2 normal summons now with this one and 2 crystal beasts, so we were actually fine on that one as well, but they would have to use a spell trap to get that effect off. Technically what we could have done is could have tried to bounce this one by normal summoning Carbuncle first, then normal summoning Sapphire Beast, and then going into the spell trap zone, but I wasn't sure if the effects are also negated of them being able to be put into the spell trap zone, so I didn't want to risk that one. Just normal summon both now in case they spin one and then we don't have the necessary resources. Just wanted to make sure, and they can OTK you, but they cannot OTK you through either of those two with Utopia double anyway, and we still have Torrential Tribute, so it should have been fine at this point, was my way of thinking. This is the whole thing of like with this deck, it's very controlsy, so you kind of have to make a lot of decisions in a very short time in a sense, because you kind of always have to manage your resources for the next turn and the next turn, and what could your opponent be doing, what could hurt you the most, how could we circumvent this, and so on and so on. So I flip over Crystal Conclave here now in case I have to get rid of one of my monsters, in case I have to use Torrential Tribute, because then I can actually get the Conclave effect off, get one monster on board, and I can still bounce this and can still do certain things. They did not activate Harpy Lady to this one, and now they activate a card that actually screws me up a tiny bit here, Harpy's Hunting Ground. And that is the annoying part, is that I kind of have to negate this, because otherwise, well, they just pop all my stuff depending on what kind of cards they have in hand. They still have 2 cards in hand. There might be lots of Harpies coming, so I did not want this to be going through, plus they can now bounce my monster in theory. Maybe might have been the wrong choice, but like I said, it's very much of what hurts me the most. Obviously I didn't know what this card was, so I didn't know how to react to this, if I had to save a miracle for this one or for like another card. So I thought, get this out of the way now. Their first turn wasn't too crazy, so maybe they couldn't have done much. Then I can also get the bounce going, which was good. I can also float, and I thought this is going to save me over to the next turn because I still have a field wipe and I still have a bounce. And then they flipped Icarus Attack, which fair enough, gets rid of the Synchro monster, but also leaves me basically with, if they destroy those 2, which, spoiler, they do, then it only leaves me with Torrential Tribute and 1 monster on board, which isn't necessarily too crazy, especially in the long run, because I do lose my resources, basically. Plus, I also couldn't have activated the second effect, or the first effect of Conclave, because you can't use them in the same chain, so I couldn't actually bounce stuff back to my hand, so I have more resources for the next turn, so this was a bit annoying. They now summon the Harpy Lady 1, which funny enough boosts my attack stats as well, because we're both wind monsters. I assumed they still have this trap in hand again, because that's, I don't know why else they would summon a Harpy monster in attack mode, not defense mode. That's just my guess here, because they actually quit the turn now. Don't know what their plan was, but that is what they did. I didn't draw anything very meaningful in terms of board presence either, nothing I could have been doing here, but Crystal Miracle actually quite nice here, because they are down to 2 cards, and one of them I can negate and I can wipe the board. What I also didn't want to be doing here is overextend and set 2 Torrential Tributes, because if they have Harpy's Feather Duster, which they would be running in a Harpy deck because it's kind of searchable, and a good monster, and I negate the monster effect first, then they could just wipe my whole back row and I lose both my Torrential Tributes. So this is something why I want to keep it in my hand, because I don't see them with 1 negate and 1 field wipe how they would be finishing me off here, considering it's Harpies as well. They're not that powerful. They're good, but they're not that powerful. I felt like I didn't want them to recycle stuff, and they already have a monster on board now, so I kind of negated this one. I still had Torrential Tribute in case they went for anything crazy. Another thing was, like, could have done whatever you want in this situation. I got rid of Ruby Carbuncle because obviously otherwise I wouldn't have any monster that would still be doing stuff on board. And from now on, it's kind of a top deck situation. What happens? We actually draw Crystal Brilliance. Not amazing, but also not bad here, because we actually can boost our remaining monster's attack, so it can't be easily run over. And we have a way of summoning stuff back from the graveyard, and they are not going to finish us that turn. They didn't draw into anything meaningful at this point, so we can continue to put our pressure, draw into Crystal Raigeki. Very, very nice card. Does quite a lot for us. I don't know why it's stuck there, but we'll take it for now. And then we can set Crystal Raigeki, very important, because if this card gets destroyed, or if I have to Torrential Tribute, I can still get rid of some stuff on their board, so it's not absolutely terrible. They actually found a monster, and they have another card in hand that they probably had before, so now they could be going into dangerous rank 4, so I wanted to make sure that they cannot be doing this. And since I don't have one of them in my spell trap zone yet, 1 Crystal Beast, I had to actually use Torrential Tribute here, which isn't totally strange, or it isn't totally bad, because now I can actually use two things. I can have this effect if they have another good card in hand, or if they want to set another card, and I can use the second effect of Crystal Brilliance, which actually gets me a monster back, which is quite nice. And I can trigger my other crystal card to deck thin a little bit, so I draw into one of the power spells, and that can be helpful as well, because the power spells can also get me a monster to hand, and I'm not limited to this, so I have multiple options and can start bigger plays than if I just drew into Amber Mammoth, although monsters are at the utmost importance right now. I summoned back Amber Mammoth because I can only summon from hand or graveyard, and the other option was Carbuncle, which I could have been doing here, but I wasn't sure if I messed up, because Carbuncle is a win effect, so it had to be the first chain to activate, so the effect goes through, which I wasn't sure if I actually did this. This would have been a play that you could have done as well, from summoning back from the graveyard, because the effect doesn't get negated, and then you can actually summon both of the ones in your spell trap card zone. I wasn't sure if I had done it right at the time, so I decided to rather not chance it and lose the game, but this should be fine as well. They can actually add one card back, but I was fairly certain, depending on what I drew during the turn, that I could be finishing the game off. And with this card in hand, I actually can, because this gives me at least one Crystal Beast monster on board, and one Crystal Beast monster on board is crazy good. Obviously, there's different plays, you didn't have to search Crystal Promise there at all, but this was the easiest way to finish the game off, and I thought, let's not keep it for too long, because I don't think they run any battle trap, hand traps, like Battle Feeder and whatnots, so I should have been fine, and in the end, that was exactly the case. Going for game, actually finished them off. I've got a second replay. I'll keep it a bit shorter, but I'll just show what the deck can do going first as well from the control aspect. Alright, here we are for the second replay. We're going first this time, very, very important. So there's multiple plays that you can be doing again. I decided to go for Sapphire Pegasus and use this one first. Technically could have used Rainbow Bridge and see if they have an Ash Blossom with this, but in the end it wouldn't have mattered, because I could have still gotten my Crystal Bond and done the exact same thing, gotten the Rainbow Dragon to hand anyway, which is quite important. Now we end on two monsters, one of them is negated, which means also very, very important that it doesn't go back to your spell trap zone if they're destroyed, just something to keep in mind. But since this deck doesn't run any good rank 4s anyway, it doesn't overly matter in what way you kind of do this or what you end up with. But this board is kind of fine. They actually activate the Iris Sword Soul, and this is something I wanted to be talking about. This card does absolutely nothing to our deck, like whatsoever. I can instantly stop special summoning stuff, but I'm also not special summoning anything from my hand. From the deck technically, but I've already done that. And the extra deck, yeah, like I said, we don't really have anything to go into in the extra deck, so I would not be doing that whatsoever. Same thing for Maxi. Like the main thing that would be drawn off Maxi is like basically one card. You can instantly stop. You literally just have normal summons, and you have your spell trap lineup. So Maxi does surprisingly little to you, and neither does this card really. Yes, the 2500 attack points are a bit harsh, but we still have Torrential Tribute, and we still have other ways of getting this card back. So we continue our combos. Ash Blossom is one of the hand traps that hurt this deck in comparison to any other ones. Impermanence can sometimes affect Veiler, but not overly. I think Ash is the big one. The one in the graveyard also does basically nothing to this deck. Take one Rainbow Bridge, that we shall do. Now this can, well, technically we could bounce this card to the hand, but I didn't feel like that was necessary, because I kind of wanted to get rid of the one that during their turn can't be sent to that to our zone. So yeah, we have that whole play with Conclave during their turn. I felt like was a bit more reasonable. I'm not sure if I actually remember to flip up Conclave on the right time, but yeah, going for the two monsters again, so I actually have enough that where I can do stuff, unless, like if they kaiju one of my monsters, then I'm a bit screwed, so I want to play around this, for example. And other than that, we can just set all cards, because we still have one zone, and with activating the effects, mainly you want to be activating Miracle first. Sometimes you won't have to be, but even if you activate Conclave, then you can still like get rid of this one, and you still have zones that you can put stuff in. So technically what we have is a Torrential Tribute, we have one negate, we have one bounce, and technically a float from time to time, and we have like another bounce from time to time if they already commit to board, and then we have to use our cards. So keep that in mind. You can activate the bounce effect of this card also during your opponent's turn, but sometimes it doesn't really matter all that much. They play some kind of Shadow variant, which obviously they don't trigger off of Twin Twister's effect, but that is still fine. That is why we run stuff like Crystal Miracle, because Crystal Miracle actually protects our back row, and since they wanted to hit this anyway, might as well have used this. Now, one mistake that I made, I didn't actually flip over Conclave. If I had Conclave flipped at this point, then I actually could have been using the effect of it because one of our monsters would be destroyed. But I think since this is a counter trap, you can't chain this to it, so that doesn't work because this is like, it's like rulings, that's what it is. So I couldn't have activated this there if I'm not mistaken, because I'm pretty sure I tried. So yeah, that is the thing that happened. So I didn't get the float, which would have obviously been good, but we still do fine without it. They don't get to Twin Twister aboard. Now we get to actually get this card back to our hand, and now I realize, oops, should have maybe flipped Conclave, but I still have another chance to do this with Torrential Tribute and this card being destroyed, so it's not completely worthless. But in the end, they do nothing more because they know I have another flip, I have another bounce, and possibly that couldn't have been doing anything about it anyway, so they don't really want to give away what they have in hand. Maybe they also kind of bricked on it a bit, who knows. This is mainly to showcase our playstyle anyway. And now we can just do this again and again. This is how you annoy your opponent with this. If you don't let your opponent get any resources, then this card can be super annoying. So now we can actually use the effect of Conclave during our turn and Rainbow Bridge, because now we can put Rainbow Bridge back to our hand, bounce one of their cards because this one has been sent to the spell trap zone. Now we can summon another one because it has been destroyed as a monster, so that's nice. And that's how you keep, well, I would resourcing your opponent basically if you have this, because this card is very important. Now I decided to actually bounce this one and this one, because with this I can get more field presence now, and also I wasn't sure what this was and I didn't have a negate up, so if they played a more old school focus kind of deck, more controlly, and had stuff like Mirror Force, I did not want to be running into that because our counter isn't live yet. Went in for some damage, still had a nice setup for next turn. This bounce again, still Miracle and still Torrential Tribute. So whatever they do with the 5 cards, we still should be able to, well, keep them on the down low, and they still have the same cards as before in the hand. They still only have one normal summon, which we can be dealing with somewhat easily, and they go for the same stuff again. Possibly they didn't draw into a fusion, or they have the Shaddoll fusion and only one Shaddoll monster, and we don't have an extra deck monster, so they cannot use that one either. So there's that as well. And now we can just keep going. We can keep going with the whole stuff. I did get Crystal Promise here because I tried to finish the game at this point, because technically it's very possible. I can get Carbuncle out and then summon this one. We still have Crystal Bond, so we can still search stuff. It's very easy to actually assemble enough stuff here for our OTK. We could have done this any different way. Could have done it a lot better. The thing is, if they had like a spell trap, that would have been annoying for us. We still have Crystal Miracle, could pop one of those two and negate the effect, so I was fine with this one as well. And I didn't think they were going to be playing battle hand traps, but there's always the chance. Technically, I think Battle Fader is a dark monster, so it works with Winda and Shaddoll, who knows. So this is how you finish off these kind of games. You just keep outgrinding your opponent because you have lots of resource gain, although you do run out of resources quicker than resource decks. Like Branded, for example, you cannot really out-resource. So even Dark Magician, you'll have a hard time because they get stronger and stronger the longer the game goes, and you just stay on the same power level and get a bit weaker because you can't keep up with the resources. Like you can search one thing per turn and they can just like +2 or 3 sometimes, so it's a bit annoying. But yeah, that is the playstyle of this deck. You see, you don't need the extra deck, but obviously a good extra deck would add a lot. And this is how you win games with the effects of the Crystal Beast cards, actually. Obviously, if you run stuff like Necro Valley, this kind of thing, you will win a lot of games on the back of Necro Valley itself. You will win a lot of games on the back of certain extra deck monsters, certain hand traps, obviously, and so on. You will, you know how Yu-Gi-Oh works at this point. It's like that, but this is how you win with using the Crystal Beast engine if you don't have the, well, monetary value in your deck that can actually win you the game off the back of just single cards. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a good day.